There are a couple of episodes throughout the 11 seasons of The Walking Dead that I'd argue changed the course of the show forever. Firstly, Better Angels in Season 2. We get the conclusion to Rick and Shane's storyline, resulting in a moment that would haunt Rick forever. The episode Too Far Gone in Season 4, where we see the soul-crushing death of Herschel Green, the moral compass of the story up to that point. And finally, The Day Will Come Where You Won't Be in Season 7, where we watch Negan brutally execute fan-favourite characters Glenn and Abraham. Now, these are all moments that would alter the course of the franchise for better or for worse. However, all three of these episodes are pretty notorious amongst fans and have been covered extensively online. But today, I wanted to cover a rather unassuming episode nestled in early Season 3, one that not only shifted the narrative totally, but changed it forever, and an episode I'd argue that is just as impactful on the story and themes of the show as the three I've just mentioned. And that episode is Season 3, Episode 3, titled Walk With Me. But why is this episode just so integral to the overall series? Well, let me first give you a refresher as to what happens in its 43-minute runtime. The episode opens with a helicopter carrying 4 soldiers, and out of nowhere the vehicle comes under heavy fire and subsequently crashes. The crash is however witnessed by a sickly Andrea and Michonne, who quickly make their way to the wreckage. Just as Michonne goes to look for any survivors of the crash and supplies, a group of armed men arrive on the scene. The pair hide in the woods, and the group start putting down the reanimated corpses and carry the sole survivor of the crash, Wells, back to their trucks. Just as it looks like Andrea and Michonne are going to remain concealed, they hear a voice from behind them, and holding them at gunpoint, we get the reintroduction of none other than Merle Dixon, now having a prosthetic hand after his incident in Atlanta. Andrea faints from the shock, and the pair are also brought to the trucks. We see the journey to their community through the eyes of the in and out of conscious Andrea. Upon arrival, Andrea and Michonne's weapons are confiscated and Andrea is treated for her cold. The pair then reluctantly spend the night. They quickly learn they are in a settlement called Woodbury, led by a man named the Governor. The town is idealistic in appearance, having fortified walls, people playing in the streets, and over 70 survivors calling this place home. The Governor offers them full-time residency, and whilst Andrea is open to the idea, Michonne insists they leave immediately, sensing something is off about this place. We then see the Governor ask the survivor from the helicopter crash the location of his group, to which he reveals not only their location, but the fact that they are what remains of the National Guard. The Governor then promises the survivor of the crash that he will bring all of his people back to Woodbury with him. The next morning, the Governor sits at breakfast with Michonne and Andrea. However, their breakfast is cut short as the Governor is called away for quote-unquote urgent matters. We then see the Governor approach what is left of the National Guard group, alone waving a white flag from his car window. However, after the soldiers lower their guns, the Governor quickly shoots their leader in the shoulder, and his men ambush the rest of them from the tree line, brutally killing the entire group, and also taking their supplies. On his return to Woodbury, we see him seamlessly lie about the events of the day, claiming to the townsfolk that the group were attacked by walkers and killed. Andrea tries to convince Michonne to stay, but she is adamant on leaving this community. We then get a closing shot of the Governor in a secret room of his house, staring at something. As the camera pans around, it's revealed he is looking at a tank full of walker heads, one of which being the decapitated head of Wells, the helicopter crash survivor, before the screen cuts to black. So you're probably wondering around now, why exactly is this episode so pivotal to the franchise? Because I mean, throughout the entire runtime, we don't see a single member of our main group back at the prison. But the reason this episode is just so important is the introduction of a singular character. That character, of course, being the Governor, who I'd argue is the first true antagonist of the entire series. Up to this point in the story, we'd seen spiteful characters like Merle Dixon, broken characters like Shane, but the Governor is the first pure evil character we'd seen in the story. And this episode marks the exact moment the show becomes a study on human nature. After this episode, the walkers who had controlled the narrative and been the main foe take a back seat. The Governor steps to the forefront, and it shows us a man who is not just killing in self-defense or for survival, but is actively building a corrupt power structure. This is bloodlust like we'd never seen before. And yes, you could argue Shane was the first antagonist of the series, but we saw scenes of him internally struggling about the concept of killing Randall, the remorse and descent into madness after killing Otis, and ultimately him being unable to kill Rick because he could have pulled the trigger that night, but a part of him was fighting so desperately not to. The Governor is different, however. During the episode, we see him kill Wells's men with no hesitation. In fact, he has a smile on his face whilst he does it. He then proceeds to beat the lieutenant senseless even after his death. This man enjoys the violence and the bloodshed, and this world lets him be a monster with no repercussions. And from this point forward, the show leans into a different type of horror. And the blueprints of this storyline would be used throughout the remainder of the show, which I will also touch upon in more depth in a minute. The biggest threat is no longer the dead, it's now the living, and the Governor causes this very change. I think what's so brilliant about the character though, is this illusion and the mask of a good person. To many, he is kind, loyal, and a good leader, but it's these shocking bursts of brutality and cruelness behind it all, which makes him just so unpredictable. The charisma and charm hide a monster, and he's a master manipulator. I especially love the scene in this episode where we first lay eyes upon the Governor himself at the helicopter crash. The music score playing in the background is phenomenal because it's so tense and uneasy, but it's a track that the show would only ever use once in this exact scene, despite the music's brilliance. And that's because this is a truly unique case study within the show. But it's not just the Governor, it's the existence of Woodbury itself. Being unlike any location we'd seen thus far, it wasn't just surviving, this place was thriving. It's a fully functional, self-sufficient, safe haven run by the Governor, and throughout the remainder of the season, the war that would ensue sets up a philosophical debate between the two groups, the idea of safety built on lies and murder, or the raw depiction of survival built on family and freedom. It's an idealistic clash of leaders that would turn deadly. I think the writers very deliberately placed this episode where it is in the season, to directly contrast with the episode that would follow it, being episode 4 titled Kill Within, which shows us the chaos and loss at the prison. T-Dog and Laurie had just died, Carol was missing at this point, the group are in disarray, and Rick, their self-proclaimed leader at this point, is totally falling apart mentally. It's a stark contrast to the idealistic utopia that was Woodbury, and it's very powerful and intimidating storytelling, as we know at some point these two groups are going to come to blows, and you're just thinking, how on earth are our dysfunctional, grieving survivors going to compete with a place like this? Now, like I mentioned earlier, this kind of storytelling that began in Season 3 would become the blueprints for the future of the series. It was no longer about just getting by and killing walkers, it was expansive, fortified communities led by ruthless and imposing leaders threatening our survivors. And that would all stem from this very episode. Before I wrap things up in this video, I'd like to give a quick mention to some standout performances from this particular episode. Like previously mentioned, this episode has 0 of our main cast in it, unless you count Andrea of course, but this episode still manages to captivate you and pull you in. It expands the scale of the story and makes the world feel lived in. Firstly, quite obviously, David Morsey, who plays the Governor, does such a brilliant job at encapsulating not just the pure evil of the Governor, but also making him charming and charismatic. It's one of the standout performances not just of the series, but of all fictional villains, and he was born to play this role. Another shout out also has to go to Denai Guerrera as Michonne, because I don't think people understand how hard it is to do what she did in this particular episode. She has such a big impact on the narrative, but she also has less than 10 lines. Her whole stick is she's refusing to speak and tell the Governor anything, so a lot of her acting comes through facial expressions or mean mugs, and she does a phenomenal job at selling this distrust and unease about the Governor and Woodbury, even with her very limited lines. And finally, Michael Rooker as Merle Dixon was, as always, brilliant. It was great to finally get that much anticipated return of the character, but he's not only unsettling but also incredibly funny. I found myself particularly enjoying his dynamic with the Governor in this episode because throughout the show he'd been portrayed as a bit of a loose cannon, someone who can't really be reined in, but somehow the Governor is able to control him. We see the unease in Merle's face after killing Wells's group, and I think it's the only character in the show Merle Dixon really fears, and that says so much about the character of the governor. In conclusion, this episode would change the course of the show forever by introducing us to the first true villain of the franchise. It was a threat unlike anything we'd seen before, and would ultimately change not only Rick, but the whole group's perspective of survival in this world. This would also mark the first episode in the entire franchise that was totally absent of the character of Rick Grimes. Not once did we see him in the 48-minute runtime, yet despite this fact, it would still be a crucial puzzle to the piece for the overall narrative. Like I said earlier, this very episode shifted the focus away from the walkers totally, and they became mostly environmental storytelling aspects from this point forward. The Walking Dead was always a human drama set in the apocalypse, but this episode would also change the type of horror we saw in the series. Instead of zombie chases, we got the governor hunting down Andrea or the execution of Herschel, and it was pivotal in setting up the foundations not just for the episode Too Far Gone to thrive, but also the entire series. It changed everything by introducing a character that would totally shake the power dynamics. It questioned our characters' views on survival and gave us the first look at a functional community within the apocalypse. So that's why the episode Walk With Me changed The Walking Dead forever. But with that being said, I would like to say a huge thank you for watching today's video. Please do let me know down below in the comments if there are any other episodes in the show you think aren't spoken about enough for their impact on the overall narrative. If you did enjoy today's video, please do like and subscribe as well, as it helps the channel out massively, and we are quickly closing in on 30,000 subscribers. But once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.